Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So this is number 3.
Good afternoon, Jonathan.
Hi, Bob. This number 3 in an ongoing series.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I thought I'd recap what we did in the first 2 sessions. Not going to show it all again, but just mention what is in those because the recordings are available. Then I'm going to talk about some handy Excel functions to use with Excel statements. And then I'm going to give you an update on version 3. And then I'd like to reserve most of the time for Q&A. So our first one, I think I stuffed too much into it. It was actually from a 1-hour session I had for user groups. But I talked about who's an Excel statements admin and how you become one and what they can do. And then we hit on a bunch of Excel functionality. And then I talked about the optional arguments in balance functions. And then I went over drop-down lists and then mentioned a couple of features that you wouldn't know about if I didn't tell you. And then last week, I went over how recalculation works in Excel and why, when it's manual, when it's automatic, what happens when you first start Excel, whether it's manual or automatic, and then ways to force various ways of recalculation. And then we are recording these sessions and they're available on our YouTube channel. And I don't expect you to write down that URL. You can just go into YouTube's and type in Excel Statements channel, and I think you should be able to find it from there. We have a couple of other videos there. There's an 8-minute one on installing, which is, I think, most useful to consultants, not users. We have a 1-hour recording of the typical demo that I do for people. And I think that one also has PowerPoint to start because that was for a webinar. And then there's a really old short demo that I think is actually a version 1. So if you want to see what Excel Statements was like 5 or 6 years ago, that's there as well. And then when version 3 comes out, we're going to have at least a dozen more videos out there. And those will be typically short, and they'll go over various aspects or documentation of the product. And I am going to have a what's new with version 3, probably half-hour video once we get that a little more gelled. So Excel functions that I use when creating reports in Excel statements, I use if a lot. And I used to do a lot of Excel support, answering questions on online forums about Excel. And so I got pretty good with also using Boolean algebra rather than if. And I'm not really going to touch on that today. But if you email us a question that would call for all sorts of nested ifs or something, I will probably also give you an alternative using Boolean algebra and no if statements at all. If s, or I don't know what they say, ifs, that's like if only can work with more than just one predicate. And then choose, and I'm going to show you an example of choose, also give you an example of if, and then text. And that's something that we see very often for like putting dates in your headers of reports. So here's the updated version 3, and I'm not going to give you a sneak peek today. I was hoping to, but we're still waiting for testing demo databases. And that's kind of what I'm waiting for to do the what's new webinar as well, or video. And when those are ready, they were supposed to be ready last week, but we didn't get them yet. Just so you know, you consultants out there, that I think you'll be able to purchase those as well. And they'll be available both as the actual databases and as a Hyper-V setup, like we had, what was that, 6-7 years ago, the last one that they sent out. So just so you know, and that's going to be very helpful for us. We want that to do our alpha testing, and it also obviously is going to be great for demos, which is why I'm waiting for that to do the video on what's new in version 3. I think everybody who's seen a demo of Excel statements, you've seen the really lacking demo data that comes with Dynamics SL, the Contoso databases. So it's only 2 or 3 periods of data. It's in 1999, and it's missing lots of different kinds of transaction types, and it's posted to GL in summary, all of which is not good for doing a demo. So while we're waiting, we've done a couple things, and we're almost done with this one. We're adding extensibility so that if you have custom tables in your system, so some developer or your consultant has added tables and typically maybe custom screens into your system, or if you have an ISV product, e-banking or one of the MaxQ or something like that, your consultant will be able to go in and add the relevant tables, custom tables or ISV tables, into Excel statements for you, and then you can use those for filtering or adding columns to drill down sheets. We also, I kind of stepped back and rethought JTD-BAL. JTD-BAL, that's the project balance function. We initially, I think when I showed version 3 last month, we had a bunch of required parameters with that, much like PTD-BAL, including company ID. And we, again, kind of stepped back and rethought that. And so now with JTD-BAL, you can just put your account category, your project, and task in. And of course, you can use mass list or ranges for any of those. And that's all that's required for that. So you don't have to think about anything else unless you have companies in multiple databases and you've used the same project ID in different databases, in which case we have a parameter called DB company that you'll have to put in if you've done that. So Dynamics SL, if you have multiple companies in the same database, it will not let you create the same project ID in multiple companies. The project ID is across the whole database, which is a good thing. But they can't enforce that when you have multiple databases with companies in them. And so actually when you run the install script for Excel statements, it will tell you if you have the same project ID used in multiple databases. It'll tell you, and it'll give you a little warning that may cause you to need to use this DB company argument with JTD-BAL. And last I saw, you only need to use that DB company if you're identifying a project that is used across more than one company. An example of that, maybe you set up a project ID for internal project or something like that, and you want to use the same one in different databases, just so it's the same, so you have consistency. So you're only going to need to give the JTD-BAL a DB company if you're using that project, assuming that's the only project that has the same ID across all of your databases. And DB company, we called it that. We didn't call it company ID deliberately because all you have to give it is a company ID that's in the database that you want to use. And it's not filtering on that either. If you want to filter on company ID, in other words, a project for a specific company ID, then you have to add a filter for that. And of course, filtering will be a big part of we anticipate filtering a big part of JTT val. So again, that parameter will be there, and it's an optional parameter. But if you have the same project IDs in different databases, then you're going to have to throw a company in there if you want to work with those. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in, and I wanted to give an example of choose, because this is a question we get fairly often. You want to do quarterly reporting. So how do you do quarterly reporting in Excel statements? And you guys know that you can use mass lists and ranges with accounts and sub-accounts, also with companies if they're in the same database. But you can also use ranges and lists with the period for your period argument. And so to do a quarter, you use a range, or you could use a list, but it's a slightly less typing to use a range. So a range here, 10 through 12. That's just the same way you do a range of accounts in like JTD val. And like I said, you could make that a list. You could do 10 semicolon 11 semicolon 12, and that would give you the same result. But this is then what I want to use as my period argument in my balance function. And so I've set this up, so I change the quarter, and then that's going to change. And this cell is supposed to be named quarter. Yes, this cell is named quarter. There. So you change this, and it's going to change the range that's going to be used. Okay, and I've done that by using a choose function. And so the way choose works is it says, okay, the first argument in here is going to be a number, it's going to be an integer, and starting with 1. And then depending on what that is, and you notice it's pointing to this cell right here, B5. So if it's a 1, it's going to take the first item in the following list. If it's a 2, it's going to take the second one, third one, and fourth one in this case. And obviously you can go up to 12 or whatever if you want to, but we only need 4 quarters. And so that's how this is working. So it's going to then include those periods. And for an expense account, let's go get, again, this demo data. We've only got information in the fourth quarter. So for an expense or income account, that's what you're going to want to see. And so I'm saying, yeah, use the quarter there. And so then this is showing me, periods 10, 11, and 12. So all the balance is going into that for those periods. But for balance sheet, typically, in a balance sheet, you're not going to want to see the numbers just for the periodic balances for that period. You want to see the actual year to date for that. And so for that, I had to get a little tricky. And so I used mid and find, and these are Excel functions. So what I did was I said, look at quarter and find the colon, okay? And then +1, which means take the position after the character number where you find the colon, which in this case would be 3. It's the third character in that string. So it says find the colon and then add 1 to that. So we come to character 4. And then mid is like this substring. And so I'm saying take what's in quarter, and then starting at, in this case, the 4th character, where we found that colon +1, and then take the 2 characters after that. So that's what this is doing. And so when I change this, you can see it changing. So it's taking what's after the colon, and that's what we would need then for our balance function. So I've taken this little formula and I've used that for my period argument here. Okay, so I'm saying through, because I'm using PTT bal and not YTD bal. And so you can turn PTT bal into YTD bal by putting a dash in front of the period number. It means through that period. And so I'm saying through, and in this case, using that formula to come up, and in this case, with a 9. And so if I change this to 4, which is the only one with any data, you'll see then that it's got, again, 10, 11, and 12, but it's the year-to-date balance for all periods. So, going back to your beginning balance, period 0 is what it shows up as. If we had a beginning balance in here and I double-clicked, then that would show up as period 0. And again, I'm only seeing these 3 just because that's the only data in the demo database. What I should be seeing here is periods 0 through 12, because I'm saying through period 12, and if there were transactions in those prior periods, we would see that in the number, and we would see it when we're drilling down. I don't know, is that confusing to people? Again, it's a failure of this dummy data, and when we get our new database, that's going to have, I think they told me, at least 1.5 years of actual data in it. So it'll make this sort of thing much more understandable. But I think you know about using the dash for through, and that essentially turns PTD bal into YTD bal, and the difference is that you can then drill down. We deliberately don't have drill down on YTD bal because, again, if you had 12 periods or 13 periods including beginning balance in here, and you were using, I don't know, 20 different sub-accounts and choosing 2 accounts, you might have 500 rows of data here, which isn't particularly useful in a real report. Of course, you can go in and filter and say, oh yeah, only show me that period, or only show you that account. So you might want to do that, in which case that's how you do it. You use your PTD bal, and then you use the dash as opposed to using YTD bal. And I know of a lot of sites that they don't use YTD bal. They just use this functionality with PTD bal. It seems like it's mostly not-for-profits. For some reason, they want to be able to drill down to see everything all the time. There's another difference between PTD bal and YTD bal in that YTD bal, if you're looking out in future periods and you've told it with that first optional argument to include unposted, with YTD bal, it'll actually extend out your balance for your balance sheet accounts. It'll send that out into the next period. And then obviously, if you have batches released into that period as well, it's going to include those too. And PTD bal can't do that. YTD bal, as far as dealing with future periods, it can do a few other things as well. And actually, this is one big difference between Excel statements and everything else. In Dynamics SL, it shows future periods, even balance sheet accounts, as 0. And all the other products, they just go and look at what's in the database and it's 0. But since we know exactly how the database works and some of its limitations, and obviously we know accounting as well, we put that extra functionality in for you. And I think if you go over year end, it continues the balance sheet accounts as well. Trying to remember. Yeah, and YTD bal, I think it also continues the income. Yeah, it does. And that also extends out your expenses and income. It does not plug your year-to-date net income. That just would have been too much, and it would have slowed the system down quite a bit. So if you're using that and you're looking at a future period, I don't know, maybe you've done a lot of transactions for June and you haven't yet closed May, and you want to go out there and do a trial balance using the include unposted and really see what June looks like. You may not balance because it's not going to plug your year-to-date net income like what happens when you close a period in Dynamics SL. Actually, no. Whenever you post anything in Dynamics SL, it goes in and plugs that account. but I probably went way too technical for people. But so anyway, this is an example of choose, and then I got tricky and used some of the other functionality as well. I mentioned text, so that's one, again, in a header we see all the time, and so you might want to do something like this. So I'm putting quotes around the strings because I'm going to be concatenating or adding strings together, and so you might want to do something like this. And my terrible typing skills means you have a lot more time to absorb what I'm doing here. And then the way you concatenate strings is, well, you can use a concatenate function, but I don't know any reason why I want to really do that. So I've just used the ampersand. And here I'm going to use text, that text function. Okay, and so it says it needs a value and then the format text. And so my value is going to be that number down there, but I want the period end. Okay, and that period end. Yeah, and that needs company ID, fiscal year, and period. So I'm going to do my Control Shift A. It knows where to find my company ID, my fiscal year, and I'm going to use this for my period. And I'm going to hit F4 to make that an absolute reference. Okay, so that's my period end, and that'll come up with an Excel date, which is one of those 32,000 numbers that you probably have seen enough of. And then here I put a format string in. So, and that's a date type format string. And so now when my period changes, then this is going to change, you know, based on what I've used there. And those format strings, if you go, I'm just going to right click and say format. If you go to use one of these functions, if you go here, it basically gives you all the choices, but that doesn't tell you what the format strings are. So you can look at online help or documentation or whatever, but to refresh myself, I just come down here, and this gives examples of how those formats actually are created. Okay, and you can see, so these are a lot of the number formats. And here's where the date formats start. So M, you put M in, it's going to give you the month number, and it's not going to pad that out. So it's going to use 1 character for January, 2 characters for December. If you put MM in, then it's always going to pad out. So it's going to give you a space 1 for January, and and 1, 2 for December. And then D works the same way. If you put D in, it's not going to pad it out. It's just going to give you, a 5 for the 5th. If you say DD, it's going to give you 0, 5. Actually, the month, I think it may pad out with a 0 as well. And then the year, so you can put YY in, and it's going to give you, it's going to guess at the 2-character year, or you can put 4 Ys in like I did, and it's going to give you all 4 year numbers. And then MMM, it's going to give you the first 3 letters of the month name, which can be nice as well. And then you notice I used 4 M's, and I don't know if there's one in here. Yeah, I don't know if there's one in here with 4 M's. With 4 M's, it's going to give you the whole month name of the month. Okay, so this will give you some idea of format strings, and again, you can look at the help and so forth as well. But you use those same format strings with the text function. Okay, and I'll just show you what I mean about if I just use period end here, Control Shift A, you're going to get one of, oh, see how old I am, 36,433. And that's the number of days since January 1st, 1900. And I'm sure you've seen numbers like that in your spreadsheet. And so obviously you can go in and format that as a date, but that's how dates are actually kept in Dynamics SL. I'm sorry, in Excel. Under the covers, they're kept as that number of days since number. Okay, and so format, and so text is doing the same thing. It's saying format that, and I use the short date, but again, I could do a custom date and use that exact same string I used here, and I'm going to get it displayed exactly the same way. Okay, any questions about that?
Yeah, Jonathan, I have a quick question on that.
Sure.
If we're using the tool, the new tool to enter the wacky month-end dates, if they're on a 4-4-5 week period, will it go back in and pull that exact date out? So instead of being end of month September 30th, will it say September 28th, 1998, or something of that nature?
It will. Yeah, it's going to give you the date number for any period end dates it knows about, and you know where those are. Here. So
right.
If you're using, I don't know, 13 periods or something, every year you have to go in and change these as you close into the new year. And
yes.
The new version of Excel statement will remember what has been in here in the past. And then I think I showed you also that we have a screen where you can go and put those in. Because obviously
Excel
statements is only going to know about years where it's been in use. But we gave you a screen to maintain that. We weren't planning to, but one of a consultant in Texas said you need to do that, and so we gave you that. You can the screen you maintain them in is actually, it creates a worksheet, and then you just maintain them in that worksheet, press a button, and it'll put that in the history. Yeah, and it will go find these. Actually, it's more clever just on its own. I mean, in version 2, it's more clever than Dynamics SL. So let's, instead of E5, let's point to J5. Okay, and then in J5, I'll put in 1, okay, right? 2, okay. But let's put in, what was a leap year? Or, yeah, 2000?
2000.
Look.
Ah.
So we've actually got programming in there that says, oh, that was a leap year. So let's change it to a 29. Stuff you never see until it's there and you don't realize it. But yeah, yeah. So if you're comparing, February, and you are using months, and you've got, in each column the ending date, it's going to have the correct one. So February this year versus February last year, it'll have the ending date, and if last year was a leap year, it's going to have 229. And again, this is without using that new functionality for retaining that history. Like I say, it works in version 2. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, so I thought I would do something else, which is, and there is a blog post on this as well. Let's just go in and put a couple of counts in. And notice I put that single quote tick mark in. And the fill handle just by default is going to work this way. So I don't know if these are real accounts or not. And we'll do 1030, which I know is an account. So we actually, at one point with version 1, we had set up an internal list in Excel. So if you put in a couple account numbers in a row from your chart of accounts, then you could use the fill handles with those, and it would only go and get your actual accounts. But A, it was tricky to use because you always had to start at the beginning, and you had to have more than one account. And B, it was just, I think it was beyond the knowledge level of virtually all users to use a custom list like that. But we did have that back in version 1. So what I was going to do, so we get this question occasionally. I want to do a rolling statement. So, oops, and that's what happens. So I'm using the fill handle. If I do 1 and then 2, and then I select both of these, whoops, both of these, then I can extend, and it knows what I'm trying to do. You can also do things like, oh, and by the way, using the fill handle, if you move over yourself, it will delete what's in that cell. But it's pretty smart what it can do, and you probably know it works with things like dates as well. But notice, I said we'll start with 2 and 4, and it knows then, oh, okay, then we're counting by 2s here. But what I do in doing a demo, like a budgeting or something, I do just a 1, and then by holding the control key down, when I use the fill handle, it's going to go across like this. Okay, so you guys, how to do equals PTD bow, Control Shift A, account from over here, F4, F4, F4. And by the way, you certainly don't need to use F4. You guys are probably much better typists than I am, and so instead, you can just type $A5. F4, F4. Okay, so we'll move these across. And then down. Again, we've only got data in those last periods. And so that's the way I do this. So by holding control down, I don't have to do a 1 and a 2 and then extend that. I'm not Lawrence Welk. And so instead, put a 1 in here, hold the control down, then the fill handle knows, oh, you want to increment by 1s across. But let's say you wanted this rolling. Okay, so we're going to have period over here. Let's go in and I think I have a period on my sheet 1. So I want to create a period here, but just for this sheet. So I want to make the scope just for sheet 12, and I'm going to name it period. Okay, and it's going to be there in A3. Okay, so this is named period, but it's only visible within sheet 12, right? And in the insert from SL, you change the scope here. And in version 3, this is called scope, just to be consistent with what Microsoft calls it. And so if I'd done worksheet, that would have done the same thing when I inserted it, as I just had to do using this, much longer way to do it. If you use the name box to give a cell a new name, like that. Yeah. Didn't like the space. Then that's always going to be at the workbook level. So that's going to be visible in all the sheets in the workbook. So you can't use the name box to create a name just at the worksheet level. And so you'd have to use this. Or like I say, if you're using insert from SL, then just change the scope there and it's going to make that within that. So let's put a period in here. And so I want to make this a rolling 12 months. And so my period then, I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to make, okay, so it's rolling up to my last period. So I'm going to make this equal to period. So in that case, it's going to be 11 now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this one is the cell to its left minus 1. okay? And then I'll just copy that. And you guys know I like to use the fill handle for copying. Copy that over, okay? And so when I change my period here, then they're all going to adjust that way. But of course, in this case, this would not be period 1. This needs to be period 12 of the prior year. We're working with a 12 period reporting for this. And so here I'm going to put my fiscal year, and let's go do a fiscal year. Actually, I think I've got fiscal year. Yes. So this is coming from sheet 1 because that was worksheet, workbook scope, as is sub-account, ledger ID, company ID. It's finding all those on sheet 1. And you notice these aren't color-coded? Well, they're color-coded, but only for the ones that are on this sheet. So unlike if we were doing this on sheet 1, it would color-code and show you where these are. But since it's on a different sheet and you can't see that other sheet, it doesn't make sense for it to color-code. So yes, it can find these, but where it's finding them is not something that's visible anyway. So that's my fiscal year. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, if this cell is 1, right, then 12. Otherwise, that cell minus 1. Okay, and then I'll copy this over. And what did I do wrong? If C4, oh, I forgot to put the equals 1. If, oh, yeah. I put a 41 in instead of equals 1. So, okay, so that one I got right. So I'll copy that over. So that flips it to 12. And then I have to do something similar for the fiscal year. And so I'm going to do equals if this, whoops, if this equals 1, then, well, okay, fiscal year minus 1, I'll just point to this, then this minus 1 else. Okay, so I've done the same thing. I'm looking at the months with my if, okay, and that will get this then to change. And so what I need to do then for my fiscal year here is point up here. Okay, and then I'll just copy this across and down. There's more than one way to do this. I think this is just the easiest way to explain. So, I put a 6 in here. We're going to see all zeros, but you can see it's shifting the year when it needs to, and obviously the months as well. Okay. So I'm using if, and of course, you can hide these rows if you want to, for your pretty report, and then just go change your fiscal year or change your period, and it's going to adjust all these using those hidden rows. Oh, and to unhide things, you notice we can see things are hidden here. If you grab at the right point here, you can unhide. There we go. So I just unhid row 4 that way, as opposed to, doing this. unhide. And you can hide a row. This is exactly equivalent to hiding a row by doing that. Okay, so row 3 is hidden just as though I had, used the hide unhide, except I didn't do it quite right. There we go. But that can be tricky, so I don't use that. I'm not adept enough with the mouse to do that. But just as a kind of an aside, you can do that as well. Okay, so I think that covered the ones I had hit. I didn't do if-s. What if-s does, you saw how if works, and I'll do Control-Shift-A, and again, just like with the XLstatements functions. So it's saying, give me a logical test, and then if that logical test evaluates to true, use the next item in the list. If it evaluates to false, then use this third item in the list. And you can see how I was using that up here. So if M1, which is the relative one over to the left, if that equals 1, then make this cell 12. Otherwise, make it that cell -1. So if S is kind of a combination between if and choose. So if S, and you see the dot, dot, dots, that means it continues on here. And so you give it a logical test, and if it's true, then it'll use the next item in the list. And then the third item in this list would be another logical test. And if true, it would take the fourth item in the list. And then the next one, you could put another logical test in, and you could just keep working out that way. And so it works its over to the first value that doesn't, or the first test that doesn't evaluate to false. And that's helpful if you don't want to nest a whole mess of ifs together, because if can only look at one thing and can only give you two, true or false. And if S, you can look at several tests without having to nest ifs together. In other words, you don't have to do if, and then if, and then another if for your logical test, that would give it true or false, and then you use that for the next ones and so forth. If S, which I think is relatively new. I think that may have come with XL 2013 or maybe 2010, but in the olden days it wasn't there. Okay, so any questions about Excel or Excel statements? Nope.
Can you hear me, John?
Yes.
Okay. Can we go back to you were talking about text and putting a nice pretty header on our reports, which I have been looking for a way to do this, or I've been wanting a way to do this for a while. I knew there was a way. So I love the for period ending and how it can fill that in automatically. Is there a way to pick up, like when you export from Excel statements out to a PDF or a worksheet where it can do an automatic filler for the names of your sheets as your header, kind of like what FRX did? You would just put in a header and it would pick up the name automatically for a title on your sheet.
Okay, the name of the sheet from down here?
Yeah, like the sheet or some other way it can pick up.
Going back like a couple decades when Excel first came out, they didn't have the macros like they have now using VBA, and there was what are called an XL4 macro, which is a completely different kind of macro where it would do that. I know there have been questions about that. I don't know if they added that or not. If they did, it's probably going to be here. To info type. Shoot. There may be a way to do it now. I know there wasn't for a while. You can use the old XL4 macro, but not only are those not documented, but they're also not guaranteed to work or to be around in the future. So actually, we had taken advantage of some of that XL4 with version 3 to make our drop-down lists much more efficient. And then last week, or was it this week? Yeah, last week we were testing, and all of a sudden it gave us a really strange message when we went to save a workbook, an XLstatements workbook, and the message was, you're using XL4 macros. You have to save this as a macro-enabled workbook. And of course, we don't want people to have to do that with XLstatements reports. And it was like, where did that come from? And we realized it's because we used one of those XL4, which are not macros. They don't require a VBA module or anything like that. And we also found if you said no, it would still work. But we didn't want to have to tell people say no when you get that message. It's just, it's ridiculous. So unfortunately, we had to undo all that programming, the clever programming we had put into version 3 for drop-down lists, and go back to what we're doing in version 2. But yeah, so they're dangerous. I'm pretty sure you can do it with an XL4, and if you email me, I can look that up, from the undocumented documentation and tell you how to do that. But otherwise, I don't think they give you a way to do that yet. I know it's on their list, and it may be in the latest versions. But like I say, if they were going to do that, it would probably be using this function, which is kind of interesting. You can get your file name from here, right? But what you'd like to get is your sheet name, right? And unfortunately, it doesn't look like I put it in there yet. But how about that? See, so I can get the file name.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and I haven't saved it, so it doesn't have a file name. But yeah, email me in any case, and I'll research and find out if they have added that. But no, it never used to be there, unfortunately. Anything else?
No, I love your that choose function that you did for the quarters. That kind of opened up some things for me.
Cool. Yeah, this I thought might be getting a little too technical, but I didn't want you to have, oh, here's where we change the quarter for our income statement, and here's where we change it for our balance sheet. And your income statement, you want it to look like this, and your balance sheet, you want it to look like that. And so that's why, I threw this in, which, like I said, is a little tricky. But I think most Excel users that I know of love learning stuff like this, about how to go and grab part of that, the part that you need, just by writing a fairly complex formula in Excel.
I do love that, and I love the when you described how to change the scope of the name.
Yeah.
I have had issues with that for a long time and never realized it was because I needed to change the scope from workbook to worksheet.
Yeah, and of course you can see them and work on them all in here, and this is going to show you the scope as well. So if you're puzzling about that, this is the first place I would go. So I can go in and look at them all, and I can see the scope, and I can see what they're pointing to as well. And you can notice the ones that we add, we even give you a little comment on them as well, that we added those in. And in version 2.5, we started all of the ones that we use internally, like this table. We put this little, it's kind of like a little tiny X in front of them. And that way you can't easily create your own name that's going to confuse Excel statements. So ones it uses internally, it'll put that little tiny X in. And just as a secret, we also have other ones we're using internally, but those are hidden. So they're not going to show up in this list. But those are there as well. We can't hide this because it's actually a table name, and Excel doesn't allow you to hide table names. So the way that works, I can go and say, go to that table. and that'll then select that table. And a table name is a little different from most names in Excel. But since we control all this, we're giving it a name like this. But if you just go in and create a table, it's going to give it a table. It's going to give it a table name. So if I say, oh, we're going to save this as a table, we're going to change this to a table. I believe that's on here. Yeah, format as table. And let's make it look like that. Okay, and we'll say, yeah, it's got headers. Yeah. See, these are formulas, and it's saying, well, gee, if that's a header, we can't use formulas for header. Do you want to continue? I'll say yes. So I lost all my formulas. But it has automatically given this a name as well. So you'll see now, table 11. So it assigned that automatically. Cool, huh?
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, and if I go to that, then I can format as a range. I can't remember how to do that, but there's a way to turn that back into a range again as well. Okay, any other questions? Oops. I'm just gonna read my mail.
I got one quick question, probably. You mentioned that in the next version, we're going to be able to extend out to tables that we may have created within the applications. Will that extend
I call those X tables because you're supposed to start the table name with an X.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the table exists in another database, that won't work, will it?
No.
Okay.
If you need it across databases, you can put it in the system database, and then you can tell it that it's in the system database, and it will find it.
Yeah, no, we've written a proprietary product, and we send certain pieces of data over to the GL and AR and project table, and but we've got a whole lot of other stuff in our own system, and yeah, so we could create a table if we wanted to report on that, and basically just update that particular table with those elements as when it gets populated. So that's not a big deal. I was just wondering.
You might be able to do it with a view.
Oh yeah, we could do it with a view.
Yeah. Then you have the fun SQL Server security dealing with views in other databases, but you probably know how to deal with that.
Yeah, we could do that easily.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. Okay. So maybe I'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay.
Yes.
Bye.